Welcome, Larissa.
Thank you, Eva.
We go quite a way back. However, I don't really have a memory of it, but you once said to me that you remember seeing me being pushed through the gymnasium at Epworth Hospital when I had bright red hair. Do you remember saying that?
I do, but I'm not sure if it's true or not.
Yeah, really?
You know, brain injury, memories, who knows?
Oh.
I'd like to think I remembered you because we both were at Epworth at the same time.
At the same time.
Bethesda, as it was known then.
Bethesda, absolutely. And we were in the Elim building doing our rehabilitation.
Okay.
There you go. So, could you please introduce yourself and tell us about your practice, please?
Sure. My name is Larissa MacFarlane. I am a proud disabled person. That's important because it took me a long time to get to say that. I worked hard for it. And I am an artist and a disability activist. Do you want me to tell you about just my practice or my disability as well?
Go for it.
Sure. I think it's the context is important.
Absolutely.
So I did enter the disability world 26 years ago, around that time, when I was 29, when I acquired a brain injury, where I met you, potentially. And since then, I've also acquired a few other chronic illnesses, like chronic migraine and also trauma. I'm thinking of all the neurological things that I have. ME/CSF, which is CFS, which is myalgic encephalomyelitis, also known as chronic fatigue syndrome, and a genetic condition called EDS, which has some neurological complications, which have affected my brain, where I leak fluid from my brain.
So is that Ehlers-Danlos?
Yeah.
How do you pronounce that?
Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, commonly known as EDS. And
that's hereditary?
It is, yes. It's a genetic thing, so I had it from birth, although it only became more apparent after my brain injury. And you probably know this about the medical system, but they don't really like diagnosing chronic illness, and particularly ones that are, especially if you're a woman. So I didn't actually get diagnosed until only recently, only a few years ago, even though I was aware of it for a long time.
Well, that's what they say, don't they? They say that the medical history is overwhelmingly patriarchal. So they've done most of their studies on men, whereas conditions that affect women haven't been focused upon at all.
And I would qualify too, it's mostly white, straight, cisgendered men. So that if you deviate from any of those, then it is more difficult in the medical system. I think the medical system also compartmentalises. They're not very good at seeing big picture, and they often will see a particular illness by itself. And and that's obviously, we're humans. We have lots of things going on.
We're all facets, really. It's like a kaleidoscope, and our particular thumbprint is always different to the next person's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, my practice.
Yes.
My practice in life.
Yes.
My life practice. Many facets to that. And they're pretty much all related to my brain injury. So my brain injury, I'm sure you know, and many guests you've had before, brain injuries change your life. They can change your personality, change your skill set, change your interests. And for me, I gained the passion to be a visual artist. I'd never done art before. My brain injury, never been to an art gallery. And suddenly I was really interested in what I could see. And so I started trying to learn how to draw. And I wasn't very good, but talent is actually I don't believe in talent. I think talent is the ability is the passion to do the work to get better. And I had that, the passion. So I tried lots of different things, and I found my way into printmaking. So liner cuts and etchings, quite an old sort of traditional way of making art, but really appeals to me because there's so many complicated steps. So it was also a bit of brain injury rehabilitation by taking all these steps. And then alongside that, I've been involved in disability self-advocacy and disability rights since really early on, trying to understand myself, trying to make the world a better place for all of us, and also trying to work out why we were so feared and so seen as such a problem and so negatively portrayed. That took me a long time to work out. And eventually I did work it out. But it took a long time, and it was through discovering the social model of disability, which took me a long time to find. And I hope today it doesn't take people as long, but it was probably about 12, 14 years. And then I started to understand why we see disability in such a negative way. Because
can you share about the social model for people who don't know about it?
Yeah, because I'm very passionate about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think it can really change the way we see disability. So at the moment in Australia and many parts of the world, we see disability through the medical model, which very much sees that you have a problem with your body or your brain or your mind, and that it needs to be fixed. Or if it can't be fixed, it must be managed or cured. And it's always seen as a problem. And it's often seen as an individual problem. And in that scenario, if you're the problem, you can never win. You're always going to be a problem. 30 years ago, around the rise of the modern disability rights movement in the 70s and the 80s, was developed the social model of disability, which says that disability happens between the interaction of somebody's impairment with barriers in society, the structures of society. So that, maybe you are a wheelchair user, and that only becomes a problem when there's stairs. Or maybe you have a brain injury with sensory overload and you can't handle fluorescent lights. You're fine most of the time, but when you enter a room with fluorescent lights, then you have a problem. So the problem actually lies within the building and the structures. And it's also about the attitudes of people towards disabled people is what creates the disability.
I love it. I mean, I don't love it, but I remember when I encountered that system of thought through my work with women with disability, how life-changing it was. It changed everything. I think here in Australia we're so stuck in a fear-based paradigm, fearful of people with disabilities, which is crazy.
Yeah, and I think, so I agree with you. So a big part of when I learnt about the social model was, that led me to understand that the problem doesn't lie within me. My body, your body, are disabled people. Disability is a human experience. We're all going to experience disability at some point, or almost all of us. We might acquire a disability, injury, accident, illness. We care for somebody. We get old. It's something to be embraced, really. But when I learned about the social model, also I realised that the problem isn't within me, it is within the structures of society. And because the problem's not within me, I don't have to be ashamed, because I had spent all those years going, why am I embarrassed about my disability? Why am I embarrassed even about the good things that my disability gave me? Like my brain injury gave me this career as an artist. It also gave me lots of other things like handstands. That's another story. It gave me lots of things, and I still was experiencing sort of embarrassment about them because it was connected to my disability. And I didn't want that to be the case. But when I discovered the social model, I realised that I didn't no longer need to be ashamed. But the problem was I still am, because when you live in a culture where, we can't help but inherit or gain that the beliefs of society, they get buried in us all. So one way to challenge those feelings of shame that are not mine, they belong to society, but they're within me, is to practice disability pride. And so that became also a guiding force.
Yes, and that brings me to my next question, which is, you rose to some media attention back in 2019 with your Disability Pride Wall. Can you take us through that journey, please?
Sure. So I think you're referring to the Disability Pride mural in Footscray, which was actually 2017.
Oh, 17.
Yep.
Excuse me.
That's okay. And the journey didn't start there. It actually started years before. I did lots of small disability pride things because I started becoming a street artist and putting my work in the street, partly as a way to move away from the gallery where I kept getting messages that I shouldn't use my disability. I should hide my disability as an artist. And I couldn't do that. That felt really uncomfortable. And so I thought, well, if I put it in the street, nobody can tell me off there. But anyway, so I started trying to then gather people around me to say, let's make a big mural about disability pride. But it was really hard to get people to come because it was still a very new concept. And it's quite terrifying. And most people at that point, as we know, most disabilities are invisible. And that also meant at that time a lot of people weren't proudly identifying. People were keeping it secret because they knew the discrimination they would face. And so I was asking a lot of people to say, come with me and make it public that you're disabled or you're mad. And that took a lot of convincing, so years. So yes, finally I convinced enough people to come with me and we created this big mural. We threw a party and we, put up all this artwork on the wall. The reason it got the media attention is not for the good reasons, because I think it probably would have just been ignored by lots of people because nobody really understood it at that point. But unfortunately, the mural was accidentally removed a week later on International Day of People with a Disability.
That's unreal.
And I had to I couldn't help but be angry. I thought I was hallucinating for a day.
Yeah.
And then I realised that I wasn't.
How was it removed?
So this particular artwork, at that point, my street art practice was paste ups. So you use paper and paste them onto a wall. They can last years, but not if you get a high pressure hose and remove it. And so the council had asked the anti-graffiti team to go and clean the wall.
So it was the council?
Yes.
Wow. But wasn't it part of the arts festival that was going through Footscray at that time?
Yes.
But
people...
Cognitive dissonance, this is...
Departments. Different departments not talking to each other, I think. I think what was then hard was that obviously we needed to do it again because you can't let something like that happen. This was the first Disability Pride mural in Australia, possibly the world. And there was no way we could let it, that be the case. It's gone. But I'm not sure I had all the resources and energy. It was a lot. I was truly exhausted by the time we'd done it, and then to have that happen. And then because there was a lot more invested by non-disabled people, there was a lot more control of it. And I think that, as we said, non-disabled people find disability a bit threatening, scary. And the idea of disability pride, I think, is incomprehensible for some. So it was quite hard work to keep it in disabled hands and to not let it be modified to fit another audience.
Of course.
Yeah.
So I haven't...
But we did do it.
Yes, we did do it.
It did go back up again.
I know, because I was part of it, and I'm very, very grateful to have been part of it. Can you let us know a bit about your paste ups and let us know about the context of your paste ups? And you had an exhibition at the Arts Gallery, the NGV.
At the it was the Art Centre Melbourne.
Okay. Oh, well, right. Okay.
Yep,
right.
next door.
Yep. So let us know about your paste ups and let us know what the motivation behind them is.
Okay. It's hard to be concise.
Yep.
But I guess handstanding has become a symbol of my own personal disability pride practice. After my brain injury, about 6 years after my brain injury, I got in my head that I needed to learn how to do handstands. I was a very uncoordinated child. I never did them. So at 35, it was a big mission, but I was very committed. And yeah, it took like almost a year, I think, to sort of work out how to do it and to, get tips and tricks. And I started doing handstands, and they really did help me.
When you're saying handstands, you're handstanding up against the wall, aren't you? It's so you're not. You're not staying in free space, are you?
Sometimes I do.
Oh, wow.
But because I see my handstands more as a therapy, I feel amazing when I'm upside down. I think it's because all the blood goes to my head, so I feel good. But it also just helps my chronic pain. It's also joyful. I might be crying a lot. And if I do a handstand, it's really hard to cry upside down because it's hilarious. So it cheers me up. It's also about challenging trauma as well. Like doing a handstand is quite scary. I mean, not for me so much anymore, but there's still an element. And when I do that, I face my fear. So I get to achieve something, and trauma doesn't, take over my life. Anyway, so I've been doing handstands for years by this point, every day, getting really good at it, and no one knew. It was this big secret because it was attached to my brain injury. And I really wanted to share it. And so I thought, well, I'll put it in the street. So I started pasting up images of myself in handstands in the street, in the places that I did them, to sort of mark out my spot, to go, this is my spot here. This is a safe spot to do a handstand. And I was also trying to explore why I was handstanding and how this was connected to disability pride. The stereotype of a disabled person is not somebody who does a handstand, is it? Plenty of people do, but it's not the stereotype. So I was trying to work out how to break down that stereotype, I guess. Yeah.
So obviously your paced up work has continued to develop constantly. How is your smaller 3D work going? Like the work of which I have a piece on my wall, and of which lots of people have a piece on their wall in Melbourne these days.
Printmaking.
Printmaking, yes.
Yeah. So I see myself primarily, as a printmaker. I was going to say, I don't know. Anyway, I'm very passionate about printmaking. Yeah, and that continues on, and I must admit, due to my brain injury, I have difficulties being online, so I don't have a great online presence, particularly in recent years. But that's okay. I engage in my art in many ways, and I share my work many ways. It's just you may not necessarily find them online as much.
You see, I really wanted to say something about that. I think there is an over-attention and over-concentration on digital work these days, and I just love the fact that your art is so 3D and so analog. Analog, yeah. That's what it is. I love it. The Disability Pride Wall was a manifestation of your advocacy work. Can you let me know what has you coming back to that subject so repeatedly?
Because I believe, as an advocate, as a disability activist, I'm involved in lots of different advocacy spaces and campaigning spaces around disability rights. But as that person, I truly believe that disability pride has to be at the centre of our work. And I mean, it doesn't have to be, but it makes the work easier and more possible. Because if you can practice disability pride, then one, you get to, undo that shame. And there's so much emotional energy that goes into managing, the shame that belongs to society. So when you practice disability pride, you get to lighten that load a bit, and you've got more energy and time to do the important human rights work. The other reason I think is that for a long time working in disability self-advocacy, I'd see amazingly powerful, strong self-advocates. But as soon as when we worked together, but when we sort of separated and went out into the street, into our own worlds, we didn't have that strength anymore. And we found it harder to put, it is hard, in a room full of non-disabled people to put your hand up and say, hey, what about this in terms of disability? But when you practice disability pride, when you can identify as disabled and proud, that makes that work easier as well. So I think we're going to see more, a quicker progression towards disability rights through us all practicing disability pride.
Absolutely. And I have to say that's what this is all about, isn't it?
It is.
Yes. Yeah.
And Eva, I will say, I mean, you are, when I talk about those people who, you know, we were great together, but individually we weren't as strong. You were not one of those, because since I've known you, you've always been someone who is like identified as disabled in every situation, almost.
I'm a showgirl. I can't help it.
But yeah, and another thing about disability pride, I think I should say, practicing disability pride is also about connecting to your culture, learning about disability culture, connecting to community, not feeling as alone, learning about our history, because that's often really hidden, finding our ancestors and our role models. But it's also about giving something to the future, because, you know, by practicing being disabled and proud, we're role modelling for our younger selves, but people to come. Their journey towards pride is not so hard.
Yes. Yeah. Fantastic. What a beautiful way to finish this interview. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing your enlightening and humanising point of view and perspective. Thank you so much, Larissa.
Thanks, Eva.